In the 1950s, the United Kingdom, in an effort to house its growing population, started to erect tower blocks all over the country, specifically in London. Most of Britain's social housing was crumbling Victorian-era terraced housing that was mostly destroyed during the Blitz. I promise this video isn't one of those video essays that spends 30 minutes defining the dictionary definition of the word mammal before talking about Pokemon. I am going somewhere with this. This video is about a British TV sitcom, by the way, so buckle in, it will take a while to get there. You see, these tower blocks, despite going out of fashion in the late 1960s due to crime, poor maintenance and vertigo, still fill the London landscape, mainly because they cost too much to bring down and they do actually store a lot of poor people in one easily quarantined social space. Tower blocks are, often but not always, ugly, shoddily built, aging terribly, and attract crime like John Luther on holiday. Still, we have to live with the mistakes of the past. I have, and I've only got stabbed 4 times, and my addiction to ketamine is mostly recreational these days. I know, I have the voice of a comedy cowardly Englishman from an American film, but I've done my time on one of the nation's streets in the sky. Have you seen Dread? It's like Dread, except there's no judge coming to put you out of your misery. Tower blocks, or flats as they are known round here, because what else do you call the things that specifically point out from the ground in a long vertical line, and the council estates that surround them are an everyday fact of life in modern Britain, and the criticism for them is long-standing. But what can you do? Better than being homeless. I blame the French, of course, but unlike my usual state-sponsored French hatred, this hatred actually has some good grounding to it. You see, tower blocks were inspired by the architecture of Swiss-French architect Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier is considered the architect of modern European urban planning, but he's also seen as the man who didn't really care about the people he was housing. Culture and society went out the 15th story window. Corbusier could stack folk like nobody else. Also, he was possibly a fascist. He was pally with Mussolini. I'm not just picking on a dead Frenchman who can't defend himself. Not that I wouldn't do that, it's just that I'm not doing that in this specific case. Why in God's name have I started this video with 2 minutes of British architectural history? Because it's that British architectural history that's directly led to the creation of one of the best cult classic British sitcoms ever created. You can make a comedy about a lot of things. Sitting in the break room of your boring office job, being a taxi driver, even just coming home from work. But 2 kooky flatmates and their misadventures is a tried and true formula. Odd couple classic, as it were. Today's Body on the Slab, fundamentally, is Odd Couple classic, but it goes about things in a distinctly different way. Rather than detailing the troubles and tribulations of 2 wild personalities, it brings things home to roost, giving us both a much more mundane look at the world alongside a significantly strange one. Sometimes you have to work with what you are given, by dead Frenchmen from 50 years ago, and that's the story being told in 15 Stories High.
Get off and milk it!
15 Stories High is the brainchild, primarily, of Shaun Lock, and if you've watched any British panel show between the years 2010 and 2020, you know who Shaun Lock is. Alongside Lock, the show was also penned by veteran comedy actor Martin Treneman, another face you'll probably recognise even if you can't put a name to the face. And never mind the Buzzcocks host and man getting bullied by Vic Reeves on Shooting Stars, Mark Lamar, though he's credited as Mark Jones in the title, presumably to disguise his identity from hostile Filipino drug smugglers. Initially a radio show co-starring Peter Serafinowicz, aka Darth Maul, or his greater role, Brian Butterfield.
Croupier. Lord Mayor's croupier.
The show detailed the lives of sardonic misanthrope Vince and his naive, good-natured flatmate, Errol, alongside giving us snapshots of the lives of other residents in the tower block they lived in. 15 Stories High is kind of unique in that regard, in that it is a hybrid sketch show and sitcom. Sure, programs like The League of Gentlemen would have plots running behind the sketches, but 15 Stories, mostly, keeps the sketches self-contained, with little fear of them breaking out into the A-plot. As all good British comedy of the time did, 15 Stories graduated from radio to television in 2002, though Errol was recast as Benedict Wong, who you might recognise these days from Weapons or playing, well, Wong in Doctor Strange. Now, you might notice a subtle difference between these 2 actors. I'll give you a few seconds to guess. That's right, Peter Serafinowicz is taller. Why? What did you think it was?
It was supposed to be a mind experiment, whoever came to your mind, but it was a joke, doesn't matter.
Shaun Lock had been a stand-up long before 15 Stories was a glint in anyone's eye, so translating his live comedy to writing presented something of a challenge to him, though there are some situations in the show that are just sort of direct adaptations of his live material. Before 15 Stories, Lock had done very little telly work, and it was his big breakout, well, cult breakout. Still, the show only got 2 radio series and 2 TV series before everyone was off to do other things. I suppose there's not much else to say about the lead up to the programme. Best crack on in saying what it's actually about.
It's not about crisps.
It is.
Hey, your back wheel's going round.
There's no real ongoing plot here. It's a situation comedy. In episode 1, Vince accepts Errol as his lodger in his grungy flat in a rundown tower block. The two get along like, well, Bernard Black and Manny.
Get out!
You know the setup. The grouchy, world-weary one who, on the surface, seems like the smarter one, but is actually just more avoidant and therefore is less likely to blunder into scrapes. Then there's the apparently dumb one, but here it's less about intelligence and more about naivety. Vince seems to have resigned himself to his life. He doesn't try to change things. He doesn't necessarily like the status quo, but he fears that any change to the status quo might be a disaster. Which, to be fair, is exactly what happened when Alan Lancaster left. That joke was for exactly 4 people, and I'm one of them. Errol seems to have only recently left his family home up north, heading to the big city to get away from his hectic home life. He's a good boy, but easy to trick, not having the social graces of those already fed through the system. I'd say he was a little bit autistic. He takes things literally, he's awkward around people, his hands naturally seem to default to this raised, self-soothing position, literally me. Vince, on the other hand, works as a lifeguard at the local swimming pool. He does not care about his job at all. He takes over the kiddie pool in one episode because the previous person in charge put the wrong chemicals in the water, only for the end of the episode to reveal that Vince has done the exact same thing. When he does care about his job, it's because he might be able to get a little bit more money or a little bit more respect or power or to get off with someone he likes. He seems to secretly crave being liked, or at least assumes people like him better than they already do. Errol, on the other hand, gets on easier with people, at least initially. He says yes to everything and never wants to harm a soul, but this usually leads to him getting taken for a ride, either by Vince or someone else. What's interesting about this, though, is that the show rarely sides with either of them. In fact, usually both Errol and Vince wind up in wacky situations of their own making, and the idea of a moral victor seems almost quaint by 15 Stories' reckoning. Take, for example, Series 1, Episode 5. Vince tells Errol he should avoid people because all the neighbours are nutters, and judging from the sketches that intersperse the main plot, he's 100% right.
Mr. Burton, no here.
Errol does so and starts to come off as rude, but then his good nature gets the better of him. In order to not be called a racist, he winds up having a good time drinking rum and watching Gandhi with an elderly neighbour. Now influenced by Gandhi, Errol tries to be the change he wants to see in the world and cleans up a messy patch outside the tower block lift, only to get told by the caretaker to undo his hard work and pour syrup on the floor because he doesn't want to risk a lawsuit if someone trips up. Pouring syrup on the floor of a public area gets Errol berated by an old woman. But then a woman, greatly implied to have been a Bond girl from the 1960s, drags him into her flat, and it's then greatly implied that she gives Errol what might be his first sexual experience. The way this story is presented is fascinating. Errol tries to follow Vince's cynicism and pays for it. Then he tries to do some good in the world and pays for it. Errol's night of passion with a green woman isn't presented as a reward or a punishment, it's just a slightly awkward situation. Meanwhile, in the Vince plot, Vince is pestered by youths for telling a boy he hasn't got a dad. Instead of getting fired, or even successfully annoying him,
I don't mind insults, as long as they're accurate.
Vince winds up ending the feud by taking them out to McDonald's and then to see The Shining. It's not a great victory or a bad guy getting his comeuppance, it's just a thing that happens, and that's really the absurdity of it. Situations in 15 Stories High can get highly surreal. There's a man with a horse in his flat, there's an old woman obsessed with feeding pigeons who's had her eye plucked out by one, and that's not even getting started with the bizarreness we get to see from the little random drop-ins we get on the other flat residents. Usually, these cutaways kind of function like those you'd see off Family Guy or something, except that they are implied to be happening right now to people only connected to Errol and Vince because they live in the same building as them. Situations range from a man trying to teach a boy how to play the guitar and he'd just get really into playing the guitar himself, to a street performer telling his wife he's up in court for assaulting a police officer, to whatever the hell's going on here. Actually, that last guy is semi-plot relevant. He's tweaking off the same discount energy drink Vince has been guzzling. I say semi because A, Vince and this man never meet, and B, the Blue Rat energy drink doesn't even really amount to anything. Vince crashes out on the stuff right at the end, but there's no lasting effects. What 15 Stories does do regarding payoffs is often very subtle. Characters will be seen doing something seemingly innocuous only for the resolution to reveal a greater gag. Take, again, for example, a scene from Series 1, Episode 2. Errol is redecorating Vince's kitchen after peeling all the wallpaper off the walls in an act I can only describe as an autistic tell. We see Vince flicking through a magazine, pointing out to Errol what colour he wants the bathroom to be painted in, but Errol seems oddly hesitant to look at the magazine he's gesturing to, clearly uncomfortable. Eventually, Errol is forced to go to the paint shop and show the man at the desk the page from the magazine with the colour Vince wants on it. Again, Errol doesn't want to show the man the whole image, and so rips bits out. It is only then, by the image of what Errol has taken away from the picture, do we realise Vince was showing Errol a porn magazine, and the shape of the image Errol's carved out is clearly a woman. This joke only works because the writers don't tip their hat until the very end. Oh, and while Errol is standing in the paint shop, he starts tearing at the wallpaper again. 15 Storeys is tightly written, but in a subtle way that doesn't draw attention to itself. It's not afraid to let a gag go under the radar, only to be tied up neatly at the end. Errol takes a driving test. Vince buys a purple coat. In the final act, Vince's coat winds up landing on the hood of Errol's learner car. Real Chekhov coded. The show also does a little inter-episode continuity, but a lot of it's metatextual. There's a few obvious nods, especially in the final episode of Series 2, like Errol bringing up the trainers Vince cut in half at the end of the first series, but some of it is cleverer than that. For example, in Series 1, Episode 6, Vince is arrested by a policeman for killing a swan, with the policeman played by another common face of 2000s British comedy, Geoffrey McGivern. Then, in Series 2, Episode 6, Vince's dad turns up, again played by the same actor, in the nude. Complete nude. Very brave man. In the first episode, we have a running gag of Vince telling people stories that are then revealed to be stories of the person he's talking to, just now about him, and small details are changed or exaggerated. There's a whole episode in Series 2 which revolves around Vince trying to workshop an experience he's had into a similar story, even getting Errol to collaboratively help him work on making his rather uneventful attempt to take a holiday into something interesting, in a kind of false Rashomon style. Instead of the story being several different interpretations of the same event that we never find out the truth of, we see what happens, then see several different versions of those events distorted, sometimes even with Errol as a central character. There's even this wonderful bit in the last episode where Vince almost achieves self-awareness when he just doesn't care enough to spin his yarn and gives a vague outline of a tall tale with no detail, as if it's just something he's expected to do. I have heard an argument being made that the title of the programme, 15 Stories High, is literally hinting at the phrase tall tales, exaggerated stories we tell people to make ourselves seem interesting. I've not been able to confirm that, but I could see how that would be fitting. It's a pun. Stories as in buildings, but also stories as in tales. It is a common theme. Errol struggles with wind-ups and hazing at the fishmongers, only to accidentally misread a situation and fail to keep up decades of tradition by not kissing the man who cuts the heads off the sharks. Vince is tasked with keeping one of his colleagues busy while they set up a surprise birthday meal, trying to sell the illusion that no one's turned up to this guy's birthday as a joke. Only it all goes off the rails. Vince winds up just telling him to stop him eating a curry by himself, and an old lie Vince put into his job application about only having one testicle gets spread around his work colleagues. But lies and farces are just standard sitcom fare, really. The comical misunderstanding, the get me Hennemore type shit. I think there is something else at play here. Of course I do, I'm that guy, the guy who sees Waiting for Godot in that episode of Bottom where Eddie spends all their money on porn. Let me make my case, then you can decide if I deserve to be put in the stocks and have rotten fruit pelted at me.
Who do you think you are, Michael Schumacher?
I'd like to just take a moment to compliment the direction of 15 Stories High. As you can see from the B-roll, it doesn't quite look like your traditional BBC sitcom. It looks scrappy, rough, like a genuine British tower block, and this is because it's actually shot in a real British tower block. No fake half houses with the walls taken out, this is real London. This really helps the feeling of being present in these scenes, especially the sketches. We feel like a voyeur getting a very real glimpse of the bizarre situations. In the original radio programme, these sketches were facilitated by a device called the Bugger King, which Vince uses to spy on his neighbours. But in the telly programme, this device is done away with, and movement between flat rooms is done by a simple but effective wipe. We, the viewer, are being physically moved from Vince and Errol's flats to others, giving us a sense of continuity despite most sketches having nothing to do with the main plot. And there's the shooting style as well. Sometimes when far enough away from a flat, we switch to a more primitive digital camera. Flashbacks can feel like they're shot on early handheld cameras. There's a real drive towards getting the viewer to buy into this world. Outside of these technical aspects, the shots the camera is forced to take due to being in such cramped quarters leads to a weird sort of forced artistry. The camera operators and director have had to get creative with how they record some of this footage. There's this shot of Vince's nudist father, shot between a piece of abstract art framing him alone in the council estate. We see two flatmates in a darkened room, gibbering while playing a board game based around escaping a mental hospital, almost locking us into a shared psychosis. This man here is shot entirely in silhouette, so the gag of a bare-chested man frying bacon and burning himself on the boiling fat is allowed to play out with no dialogue. There's some really striking camera angles here. I have to give props to the director, Mark Nunnally. His IMDb is depressingly short, only a few music videos popping up on it. Feels like a Chris Cunningham situation, a talented artist not supported or recognised. A lot of the jokes are built into the directing too, a lot of characters moving out of shot to reveal the gag. It's a far cry from the stereotype of British comedy being Pythonesque wordplay and men wearing dresses. We are allowed to take in the squalor through a faint blue tint that mutes all colours, building a sense of abstract oppression across the entire series. It's no Wes Anderson, but it's better colour grading than 90% of what you'll see in the cinema these days. There's even a concerted effort to obscure characters' faces half the time, aiding the feeling of meeting random strangers in the wild. There is a fair amount of repeated actors across the two series. Writer Martin Treneman pops up 3 separate times as 3 separate characters, 2 of them fairly major in their subplots. Other recognisable actors do pop up as well, but usually far before the roles that would make them popular. Peter Serafinowicz gets invited back for a character alongside other popular British comedy faces like Kevin Eldon, Bill Bailey and Paul Putner. More prominent modern names do cut their teeth here, but it can sometimes be hard to tell due to the filming style. Here's Michael Smiley, who turns up in films that need an Irishman but they can't afford Brendan Gleeson. And here's Toby Jones, making the 3rd actor here who would go on to get a named role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Shaun Lock was down to play Nick Fury, before Samuel L. Jackson barged his way into the role. There's nothing that looks quite like 15 Stories. A later BBC show set on a council estate, People Just Do Nothing, goes for a more absolute realism vibe without any of the 15 Stories artistry. The first series of another cult classic, Ideal, does hit kind of close to this image, but as the series goes on, it leans more into that classical fantasy surrealism. All of this combines into driving home 15 Stories' core theme behind the jokes. These are people, hundreds of them, all cramped together in a single building, but all living entirely separate lives, divided by drywall.
I ain't got a brand new combine harvester.
Vince and Errol are 2 characters forced together. We are shown in the first episode that Vince trials several other potential flatmates, but he upsets them all in one way or another. Errol is the only one good-natured enough to stick around. Errol tries to see some good in Vince, initially thinking he's just confused, but over time he seems to become disillusioned by him, and wises up to his tricks. No one in this world really helps anyone without either payment or an ulterior motive. This concept is certainly present in the first series, but it's truly hammered home in the second. I'm not saying that 15 Stories High shows an evil Cruelty Squad-styled world of self-centered monsters. It's more like everyone's got their own problems. No one has the time or social capacity to deal with what other people are dealing with. The glamour model Vince teaches to swim in Series 1 Episode 2 finds her husband's aggressive but laughable attempts to frighten Vince away as charming and noble, but she doesn't give a second thought to carrying on learning to swim when Vince voices his apprehension of someone getting hurt. The Ice Queen Vince attempts to charm in Series 1 Episode 4 is merely a transactional relationship for Vince. She lets Vince sleep with her after he finally breaks her cold demeanour, and he immediately starts taking liberties. Their relationship lasts 2 scenes. No one seems to actually like each other. It's shown several times that Vince is incredibly unpopular in his local area. A huge crowd gathers to throw tomatoes at him after he's convicted of killing a swan. His workmates consider him creepy and chomp at the bit to start mocking him. Even his bosses practice telling him he's not getting a promotion with great glee. Errol tries and can make relationships, but while Vince can be blamed for ruining some of these friendships, Errol's naive nature leads him into awkward or hostile situations that Vince's isolationist outlook successfully avoids, only cementing Vince's worldview in Vince's head. Despite the huge number of different people we get to see, we rarely see a true crowd. The biggest groups we see are Vince's workmates at the surprise birthday party, and the line of people waiting to go on the plane in Series 2 Episode 3, and these groups are shot to give us plenty of open space around them. Buildings, on the other hand, are often cluttered and claustrophobic. The places Errol winds up working are almost always tight, cramped spaces, full of knickknacks. Their kitchen is small when both of them are in it. Characters wind up being alone in open spaces and crushed into smaller ones. I think it's interesting the very first episode revolves around Vince being uncomfortable with being touched. Sure, The reasoning he gives for it is a lie, but it's also clearly a problem for him, and while this facet of him is toned down later in the series, he continues to dislike physical contact. If you put Vince and Errol together, you get one whole autistic, not necessarily functioning, but at least complete. This focus on isolation and being unable to connect with the people around you, I feel, is championed by Series 2, Episode 4, The Plough. After getting drunk one night, Vince steals an old decorative plough from a pub and winds up digging up half the graveyard. He gives the plough back, but the local priest comes knocking and Vince can tell he's in trouble. Vince is by no means a religious man, but he has a vague understanding that a vicar is someone you're supposed to be humble towards. He genuflects, acting as if the priest can actually do something. It's like he reckons God doesn't exist, but it makes sense not to risk it. Errol calls him out for this all the way, acting like a schoolboy telling on the other pupils for chewing gum in class. To Errol, Vince's lies about not ploughing up the graveyard until he's presented with the vicar in the flesh is almost anathema to his subservient temperament. The vicar, though, turns out not to be the pious godbotherer Vince fears he is. He repeatedly mixes up Jesus Christ. He repeatedly mixes up Jesus and Judas. He treats Errol like a nuisance, and he's oddly forgiving of Vince, though he still likes to hold the idea of some form of punishment over Vince's head, mentioning all such decisions are not ultimately up to him, but rather the bishop he answers to. The vicar decides to string Vince along, with the two basically running around like truanting teenagers. They play table tennis, they go to an arcade, they set off fire alarms in a building full of praying Buddhists, and to top the night off, they go for a pint at the pub. While most of the way through this, Vince remains wary of the vicar, he slowly starts to enjoy his company. And the vicar seems to genuinely like him too, though he has a pretty strange way of showing it. It's the kind of bonding that the phrase boys will be boys is intended to evoke. Finally, at the end of the night, Vince and the vicar wind up at the church, and Vince asks to see the vicar the next day for another booze-up. The vicar declines. After a few more tries to set something up, the vicar turns around and reveals what the day has been about. The vicar is getting shipped off to Africa by the bishop the next day. He just wanted to have one last good time before getting sent off to do missionary work. Vince seems genuinely hurt by this. He calls over his shoulder,
I thought we were mates.
Only to get the reply,
I'm everyone's mate. I'm the vicar.
I don't think Vince ever really recovers from this. There's 2 episodes left of the whole show, but the next episode is The Baby, an episode where Vince does seem for the first time to actually show some ambition to improve his station in life by getting a promotion at work. It goes horribly wrong, but it is a slight change in his behaviour. The final episode seems to show Vince at his most checked out. His scheme to get out of a bet by giving an annoying co-worker, played again by Martin Treneman, poisoned ham, doesn't seem to bring him any joy, and Errol even tries to bring his father in to try and snap him out of his depression, but this only seems to make him worse. It's like the events of The Plough showed him actual human connection, just for a short moment, only to be let down, and the grim realisation of his life and surroundings starts to sink in, despite him trying to keep that reality outside his flat. It doesn't help that, in the final episode, Errol actually looks like he might be able to escape the tower block, at least in some way. He finds a woman. She's not given much depth, in fact she barely speaks, but the fact Errol seems to have found a girl on his level while Vince bemoans 2 failed relationships in his past seems only to rub salt in the wound. Sure, it's a sitcom, but 15 Stories does not entirely discard continuity. I refer back to Errol's comments about his trainers. There is a reason why I'm trying to forge this narrative, perhaps even forcing it a little. I think I should explain myself, rather than the programme.
What are you doing with that play, you twat?
Shaun Lock died of lung cancer in 2021. He was 58 years old. Shaun had a successful career, and had comfortably carved out a spot as being the actually funny person on any panel show. Hell, I'd say that man kept the genre alive. They're all bloody insufferable now. Shaun never quite did something like 15 Stories again, but he does seem to have been discouraged by how his show was treated. Despite a cult following and many fellow comedians praising the programme, the BBC rarely, if ever, reran it. Lock has even been quoted as saying when he watches old comedies on the BBC, he wonders why they never bothered repeating his sitcom. In the writing featurette on the 15 Stories High DVD, Shaun speaks fondly of the challenge of writing a sitcom compared to his stand-up work, and even seems to favour it over his stand-up writing. In this segment, he says if he could go back, he would write the character of Vince with more depth, feeling like there were times during the writing process where what Vince would have done in certain situations wasn't as structured as it could have been. The thing is, and I hate to contradict a dead man, I think he did. I think Vince does have a fair bit of depth from what we see of him, and I think it's possible that, perhaps subconsciously, those last 3 episodes are actually supposed to represent a very loose trilogy of showing not character growth, but a kind of miniature tragedy. If I am reading the episodes The Plough, The Baby and Errol's Women correctly, in the context of the rest of the series, we get a kind of portrait of an individual created by architectural decisions from people from the 1950s. An individual with clearly a fair bit of Shaun Lock's actual experience in him, as 15 Stories High was created when Shaun Lock found himself living that lifestyle. Maybe it's best to hear it from the horse's mouth.
But there's a lot of people in London who kind of get washed up in a place, and they don't really necessarily take part in normal life. They don't have, families. They don't, interact socially. They lose their touch with their friends. People move on in life. And there's some people, all their friends move on. They get married. They move out. They kind of just get left somewhere on a shelf. And that was what Vince was like. And he continually sort of was finding new ways to isolate himself, protect himself from actually recognising what his life was like. So that was really the sort of the template for it, the idea for it anyway. And I could see I've done that at points in my life. And London's a very easy place to do that, to just kind of disappear.
What's the most interesting about this interview is that he's sitting across from co-writer Mark Lamar, who at some time seems just completely baffled about what Shaun is talking about in regards to depth. When Shaun discusses what Vince could and couldn't do, Shaun seems to have an innate understanding of what Vince would do, while Mark just asks, wouldn't he? Vince is Shaun. Shaun from a particular time in his own life. Lamar and Treneman's contribution to the writer's room certainly shouldn't be ignored, but Vince as a character seems primarily fueled by Shaun, and not just because he plays him. Shaun's lamentation that Vince isn't as deep as he could have been is understandable, because Shaun intended to write a sitcom, not art. But in doing so, he's actually sort of done that, and I think he knew the importance of 15 Stories on a subconscious level, considering his later quotes regarding it. That is my central takeaway here. It is a shame that Shaun wasn't able to see what I myself, and maybe some other people, see in his own work, but maybe he couldn't because he was too close to the fire to see the forest. I do believe Shaun Lock was able to accurately portray a modern truth of Britain. In fact, thanks to the internet and everybody getting sequestered into their own little social media boxes, it's only gotten worse. Vince is that man washed up on the shore, in a little box where he can hide away from both the good and the bad of the world. I think that's a concept that resonates with a lot of individuals in similar situations right now. And despite all this, Shaun still laughed, using his sardonic, cynical wit to make people happy. Perhaps through absurdism, perhaps through shared misery. 15 Stories High should not be forgotten, whether it's a secret treatise on social alienation or just a funny comedy where a man gets glued to a fish tank to stop him from smoking. Whew. Blimey, that got heavy towards the end there. This is supposed to be about comedy. Hey, Mr. Lock, play us out with one of your funny little quips.
What would you like your obituary to say?
I don't care. I'll be dead. And ideally, I'd like it just to say, no! Why? No! Ah! You can't write tears, Jimmy.